Hit record.
Oh yeah. Let me do the backup recording myself. Thanks for that. And I guess why do I always start? By the way, why am I always the one that starts?
Because you're
No.
black. No,
Oh my God.
All right, black guys first. Here I
it had to
go.
be said. No, I mean that's actually not why. But I think it's because you're the best jazz musician. You're the most
Yeah,
famous.
yeah,
So
right.
we defer to you, and you're black,
Yeah. As a caveat.
and you just look really cool too.
You gotta keep this in. Oh shit!
Yeah.
All right, black guy first. Here we go.
Let's. I mean, shit, man. I don't know. Is that why else?
Anyway,
That's
I was
so
just
awkward.
as I question everything in life. That thought came across my mind.
It's
Anyway,
great. Let's just fucking name it. You know.
The elephant.
Call it out, man. Yeah, the magenta elephant.
I don't want to go first because I'm just another white guy talking first.
Oh,
Elephant.
jeez.
For real.
It's white fragility that comes.
Bro,
Fragility.
Is that where we're? Jesus, all of this has got to stay in. Anyway, Dynasty. Jesus Christ! All right, I gotta hold my face now.
Hey, welcome to the podcast, Alex Hoffman.
It's not usually this giggly.
It's not.
This is a rare moment here.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Dana Stevens here from Patterson, New Jersey, also known as Average Bro. And I play saxophones and EWs and all that stuff, and write and compose and teach. And as I always say, I'm an average thinker. Just an expression of the one consciousness that we're all a part of. That's it. Perhaps.
Wow, you got me going into meditation right now. Lucas.
My name is Lucas Brian Vesley. I'm also known as Lucas Brian Vesley on the internet. Musician, composer, bass player, lover of life. Also trying to express myself within the universe. Closet philosopher. Kind of thing. Hello, everyone.
You kind of trailed off there. Hey, Lucas, what's the difference between Lucas Brian Vesley accounts and Lucas Vesley accounts? Because I'm confused on Facebook.
I have way too many of those. Yeah. I guess my actual account on Facebook is Lucas Vesley. I don't really care if people visit me on Facebook, honestly. I'm more concerned with platforms like Instagram. So yeah, I need to do something about that. I have like 5 different accounts on Facebook. Why? Really? If you ask me why, I won't give you an answer. So.
Man. Yeah. All right. Well, my name's Peter Stoltzman, and I'm a pianist, and you can find me online as Peter John Stoltzman. It's a lot of letters. And let's see. Yeah, I don't know how to describe myself otherwise. I'm a dad, and I think the reason Dana goes first actually is because I'm deferential, although I do talk a lot and I have strong opinions. But that's a personality thing. And Lucas, I think you're even more deferential than I am, like maybe by a lot.
Thank you for that.
If I was thinking about it, he's kind of the one that got this whole thing started. On top of that, yes,
I love you
Lucas,
guys.
Don't.
That's right. I got lonely in COVID land, dude. I just started reaching out to people and wanted to talk.
It's awesome.
No time like the present.
So we have a guest here to talk to, and Alex, why don't you introduce yourself, man?
So I'm Alex Hoffman. I like the way Dana describes himself. I guess I can describe myself in the same way, that I play the saxophone and I'm an amateur thinker, I guess, which is, I think, the best kind of thinker to be. And I don't know what else to say besides that, Peter.
Well, do you want to, we could start with talking about social media, because I think more people know who you are because of some shit that went down on social media, right?
That's right.
And so this, I don't even know where this would lead, but I know Lucas was riffing on some stuff you were saying too, so maybe we could kind of revamp that.
You mean what I've said before we started recording?
Yeah.
Oh, well, no, I was just saying I like what Dana said to me about a year ago when he was talking to me about the idea of having this sort of program, that it's important for people to see each other face to face, that it makes a difference. It's very easy, and I was very guilty of writing a lot of things that if I was looking the person right in the face, I don't know if I would be able to say it, or I would say it in a different way. It's also true that on social media, now I'm going to go off on a tangent. You write something and then you immediately publish it, instead of in the past, if you write something and you have to go through a whole process.
Edit.
Published. And I was just reminded recently, going back to school, taking a class about the Italian academies of the 1500s. They emphasized the fact that it wasn't enough to just write and argue with each other that way, that for them it was extremely important to come together face to face and have conversations. And that reminded me of what Dana's idea was.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the idea in this book by Orland Bishop called The Seventh Shrine, the concept in Indaba, and people like talking to one another. If I would love to read this excerpt because it totally I'm resonating with what you're saying right now. And so it's the power of the speech is super important to emphasize here. So he goes on to say here, my speech embodies me as a human entity. I become what I say. So speech begins on the energetic level of the human being and includes all the various dimensions of human life processes. This begins with the physical organs that allow for the capacity for speech. It extends into the physical realm to be able to include another human being. The word, capitalized, sets up the context and includes the possibility of time because I may be speaking in the past, present, or future tense. And these are specific levels of the imagination and memory that allow us to constantly create and recreate the domain of reality. In a sense, speech is not just a literal language, not just the literal language constructs, but the meaning that we give to everything we do is speech. Every movement that human engages in is speech. We are the host and the guest of this power of speech. And just to go back to your point about like people coming together and speaking face to face, I think that's super important. And it's really important, like what we give energy to through speech, with one another. Anyway, I just wanted to.
Yeah, man.
Important. I would just add one caveat that I think speech and talking to people face to face is very important. But I think on the other hand, there's something about the written word that doesn't come across in speech. You can philosophize with the written word, I think, in a more complex way. It's more difficult to convey certain concepts in speech. Also, the written word, you have more time to gather your thoughts. You have time to organize your thoughts. So it's a double-edged sword, as people always say. I'm not sure what that means, but I think I used it right.
If I could just say a little thing, I'm what you just said, Alex, reminds me of what I talk about all the time about composition and improvisation being the same thing. Minus the element of time. I get to go back and really create and craft the improvisation if I release the restraints of time and really get to dive into each individual little part of that improvisation. Kind of like the concept of reading versus actually talking in person, perhaps. I don't know if anyone else sees an overlap there, but it's really interesting. That's firing off in my brain right now.
And I think sometimes jazz musicians, they put too much importance on the idea of being improvisers, and they think that makes them better than other kinds of musicians. And I think it's interesting. I'm not saying that that's, well, I don't think it's right, but maybe somebody could make an argument. I'm sure people have made an argument for why the improvisation is superior to composition. I've heard people try to make the argument before. But I think, yeah, that sometimes in jazz, and I think I was this way for a long time. I thought, well, I'm an improviser, so I'm superior to people that write the things down because I come up with it on the spot. Which, in fact, now when I think about it, it seems to me like maybe that's actually not. It makes me actually, the ideas are less thought out. So there's something that's missing always in improvisation. Of course, there's an element of spontaneity, and that can never be, it can't be replicated in composition, but you're missing the element of more careful crafting, like you said, and thinking through your ideas.
Yeah, and I think they really complement each other. I mean, I think they in a sense, I think they strengthen each other. You know, I remember Hal Crook. I don't know if you guys probably remember Hal, right? He would always talk about learning as many compositions as possible because they are great melodies in of themselves. You know, and therefore, I think in terms of really creating your own vibe and your own identity within the confines of these same 12 notes that we've all had for centuries, you know, I think the compositional element really is like a fast track to finding our unique kind of voice because of that element of going, you know, of timelessness, if you will, and craftsmanship. And I found playing my own tunes, which are usually often written as challenges to myself. I mean, just it just speed tracks you into finding your own way to play through your own shit in a way. But yeah, man,
it's so exciting. It's so exciting to go through this the music, these compositions, and it's like building your kind of voice, right? Like using these melodies as kind of just and affirming your, because you go back to these tunes over and over again. Some of my favorite tunes, like Daoud, that Clifford Brown tune. I'm writing a book of arrangements for the bass, and I'm using that as one of my tunes. I wanted to do Isfahan too because I love that tune, and I was inspired by your version, Dana. So that's another Billy Strayhorn tune that I absolutely love. And to really just further the idea that yes, it's so important, like to have the juxtaposition between the composition and the improvisation. I think they're both really they have their importance in being a musician, our roles as musicians, and yeah, so I just wanted to add that.
So when we macrotize that to the government,
just go there. Go ahead. Go there.
Dude,
it's like there's some moments where they speak to each other, and then there's a lot of moments where they're in the back rooms writing shit or by themselves, and that interplay is the fact that it doesn't seem to scale up may be an interesting thing to talk about. But anyway, power and things. And,
right. Well, you introduce power
incentives.
It's
all
right?
fucked up. Yeah.
So here's the thing, and maybe this goes into the power dynamic. Sorry for jumping over you. What I'm hearing when we frame it like writing versus speaking, or composition versus improv, and one is superior, and or this is so much better because of blah blah blah. I'm hearing this like kind of right and wrong paradigm, right? Better and worse paradigm, and and it's easy to then get like sucked into that, into that kind of paradigm, but I'm feeling like a better analogy. It's not necessarily into a stream, but into that channel, and you can't see beyond it. you're either on this side of the bank or that side of the bank, and or somewhere in between, and you're arguing why why this side of the bank you should be over here. And I think when we get in those kind of situations, whether it's about music or writing and speaking, or maybe even about more macro stuff, it's not about figuring out which one is right or wrong and getting there. It's really more about paradigm shifting. And I'm hearing that being expressed too, which is that we get into, if you can get into a both and, into a, what way does this align, what way does this support, right? Composition feeds your improvisation, and your experience as an improviser makes you more and more reverent and a student of composition, and want to compose stuff that becomes a vehicle for improvisation, and etc. It's like then you get into a whole other paradigm, and then these two are actually coming together and becoming more.
It's like photons and neutrons. Sorry, they don't really work without each other.
I think this relates to my experience with the whole Wayne Shorter thing and Facebook and social media. I don't agree 100% with what Peter's saying, and I'll tell you why. I do think that life is always, everything is a gray area, and I think we know that now. We've had so many years of history, and no one's ever been 100% right, and we know there's a phenomenon in science, I forget what it's called, every 30 years, a certain percentage of what was thought to be absolutely true is then found out to be wrong. Everything Aristotle thought about science was basically wrong. Yeah. But it doesn't diminish his importance. But anyway, one thing that I found was when I said fuck Wayne Shorter, which in retrospect, it's not the way to start an intellectual conversation. It's not the way to start an intellectual debate. But I wasn't actually even planning to. It was more just a provocation, not well thought out provocation. But I think people, especially in America, they have a problem with somebody saying, I don't like something, or this is bad for me. They tend to think if you say, I don't like this, or then that means I hate you if you like it, or you're not allowed to like it. And I think I was surprised by that. People thought, oh, you don't like his music. You think he's a charlatan musically. That means you must hate him. You must want him to, suffer physical harm or something, which I thought was very interesting. And I'm reading this book called, rereading this book called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life. And it talks a lot about the Puritan roots of American society, and the idea that in the puritanical society, nobody can be an iconoclast. Nobody can have a different opinion. Everybody, you stay in line, and I think obviously that heritage hasn't come down to us, any four of us directly, but I think there's imprints of it and shadows of it in the way our minds work, including myself, I think. And I hear a lot of things in politics, for example, that remind me of this idea. For example, when people say we have to stick together, a house divided cannot stand, e pluribus unum, and there's a name for it in French and Italian, pensée unique, or pensiero unico. And I like to call it unidirectional thought. It's the idea that we all have to be moving together. We all have to be working towards the same goal. If you have a different idea than me, then I can't even consider it, And I think while I agree with what Peter was saying, that truth lies in gray areas, if there's any truth at all, it lies in gray areas. I think what's sometimes missing, or often missing, in American society is the ability for people to contradict each other, have opposing viewpoints that are not necessarily immediately reconcilable, but to still say, to still talk about it in a civil way, or to
respect one another.
To be used to hearing things that you don't agree with, constantly. And I think that I've noticed in my very limited travel around the world that in other countries, people are more used to hearing things that they don't agree with kind of on a regular basis. Of course, it's always kind of stupid to draw great conclusions from your own personal experience, which is exactly what I just did. But that's what comes to mind when I heard what Peter was saying. So I wonder what you think about all of that.
Okay, well, let me just jump in real quick. So just to clarify, I don't think the paradigm that I'm speaking about is a paradigm of like getting to the truth. And you said, you kind of characterized what I said there in terms of how you heard it as the truth is in the gray area. And I think actually the point of what I'm saying is that we're not trying to get to a truth. We're trying to figure out how to work together. And how to like problem solve, how to integrate the best of like the most helpful whatever aspects of different things, and also just try to like get into it and see like, oh wait, this doesn't oppose that, this supports that, and or like the ways that we're diverse, the ways that we're opposed are okay. It's not about oh, you have the truth, you have what's right, and I have to find my way over to you. It's that like the truth and what's right is irrelevant. Basically, I don't even really believe in a truth. I believe in.
I agree with you. I think it was a bad choice of words on my part. I agree with what you just said. But I do think I noticed like that people in Italy, for example, some place where I have experience traveling, you will see like people that they're never gonna agree on anything. Like a fascist be friends with the communist or something because I don't know, they like the same soccer team or something like that, or they just come from the same town. Of course, when it gets into a certain area, they might yell at each other, but I think they're just more mixing of different extreme ideas, and maybe not in maybe the circles that you guys run in and that I run in, maybe it's harder to see it, but I think just in general, also, this is what I hear a lot of people when I talk to people from other countries, they have this perception of America as being a place kind of flat intellectual terrain.
Man, that's so interesting. And I think there's a lot of dynamics that play into that potentially that are not stuff we could really legitimately unpack right now, because I don't have the intellectual capacity for it just in terms of what I really know. I don't have facts and figures and whatnot. But when I think about Italy, I've done a lot of traveling to Europe and Japan as well, and especially Italy. Been to Italy like 7 or 8 times, and I love Italy. But I've been to these countries. I've been to like Norway and Sweden too, or no, Denmark, and I see like the people who are, I think you're pointing at something that's right. They're much more comfortable with kind of rigorous debate and the like conflicting ideas. And I think there is an aspect to that that's cultural and or racial, that is because of the homogeneity in those societies. People are like, oh, we see each other more in this kind of family argument, kind of thing. And of course, Italians are notorious for having argumentative families and whatever, and gatherings. And but this happens in all sorts of venues. I mean, Buddhist monks are notorious for their vehement debates, right, over ideas. But it happens in like culturally homogenous spaces more often than not. And and in America, this country is like so heterogeneous, right, in so many ways, that I think it's it's more of a, it's less of a failure in that I see it, and more of an ongoing evolution that's way harder than it is in Denmark. However, you're seeing this stuff, you're seeing the heterogeneity of culture and society and race, and just background, happen across Europe too, because of mostly because of refugees, and countries taking in, thousands, hundreds of thousands, some countries of refugees, and they're experiencing some of the same like cultural backlash from the more homogenous cultures, that we've seen in the United States for generations and generations, right? And we've been grappling with that shit of how do you have a heterogeneous society, and so that's a whole other set of variables in there, but I think it's important to acknowledge, probably.
I agree too. I've noticed that it's very easy for, like you said, for Italians to say, "Oh, well, we can talk about anything." Yes, because on there's a foundation of common understanding. I think maybe it's less of a sturdy foundation than you might think, because Italy's a much younger country than the United States. It was only founded in the late 19th century, and it was people that spoke all different languages that couldn't speak to each other, and only in the past 70 years have they learned the same language and be able to speak to each other. I think maybe France is a better...
Which country is that?
Italy. So one of the problems that they had during the Second World War was that soldiers couldn't communicate with each other, because a soldier from Sicily spoke a totally different language than a soldier from Naples. A soldier from Naples spoke a totally different language than a soldier from Bologna. I think France
didn't know that.
Example, because France has always been a centralized nation, and it's been around as a nation for a long time, although it had the revolutions and it first was a kingdom, it was a monarchy. But I think there's a reason why jazz musicians, particularly Black jazz musicians in the 30s, like Coleman Hawkins, for example, he went to France and he was successful there and he loved it. And then a lot of guys in the 40s went, and you could say, well, they didn't experience racism because they didn't have a history of racism in that country. I've heard that argument, but they didn't go to, Australia. They didn't go to South America. They didn't go to a lot of other places that they could have gone. I think there's certain cultures that are very good at assimilating other cultures, and French culture, I think they have a foundation of intellectual rigor, just the expectation that you're going to run into different viewpoints, the expectation that you have to debate. I think it also has to do with the school system. You're forced to study philosophy in high school, which is something here that just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I think and in France, I think more so than in Italy, they do a very good job of, not a very good job, but they do a better job of making people from other cultures that come there feel like they're interested in where they come from and they're interested in their culture. And you see a lot more heterogeneity in that way. And I guess I would just add, this country is very heterogeneous in a certain sense, but I think it's also homogeneous in the sense that people basically share the same values about what your life should be like. Like, you should get a job, you have to have a family, you have to earn money, you have to support yourself. And I think in Europe, because of various different factors, you're more likely to meet someone who says like, no, I don't want to work. The state has to support me. Or somebody that says, no, the nuclear family, I don't believe in that. you hear more of these ideas that here are just kind of like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. You can't even entertain those ideas. Obviously, I'm not talking about in this company, but just in general.
Yeah. Bits of that Puritan vibe leaking through to the present, huh? Man, very, very interesting stuff. But so that's the problem. What's the solution? Right.
Well, I think another thing about this country is we're very focused on practical solutions to things. And then what happens is instead of continuing to discuss and continuing to analyze, we say, well, that's enough with the talking. And I think people around the world admire us for that. And I know that in the politics of Europe, sometimes they say, we should be more like the Americans. They get things done. They pass legislation. They only have 2 parties. You know, we have 6 parties. We have 7 parties. We should only have 2 or 1 party like them because they get things done.
Grass is always greener, right?
Yeah, I was literally just about to say that. That's just so ridiculous. I mean, what the fuck have we gotten done in like even the, you know, let's say the past 40 years, all right? What have we done to this planet? What have we done to ourselves?
I think
as
if
a
you
society? I don't
if
know.
you had lived in Italy for the last 40 years, you would be extremely disillusioned about government too, though. You know, I mean,
No, for
the level
sure.
of corruption and clogging of all government
Oh,
shit,
yeah.
except for cronyism, is so deep there.
Mhm.
People have basically given up on it, and then they like, you know, whatever kind of revolts once in a while ish, you know, and then nothing changes.
You know, you guys see that Michael Moore movie, Where to Invade Next?
Yeah.
It's like, is it
It's the
possible
title.
to like take the best elements of all these nations that are growing great in certain areas and mash it all together and like, okay, this is clearly the best way forward, you know? Like Finland, for example. I mean, look at where they were in the 70s with education versus now. Last place to first place. I mean, they did something. They did something right, you know? And
Well, hey man, this is the macro of that paradigm, right? Is like, okay, let's, rather than just being like, oh, we did this right, you're wrong, you know, and or being like, no, we're right, you're wrong, or, you know, we're right and we don't want to even change, you know. It's like, well, okay, cool, that's working for you, let's take a look at it, you know, and think about how could we integrate this potentially and make our what we're doing better.
the thing is, how do we get the, again, I always asking these pesky questions. How do we get the ones who actually have the power to make change to even travel down this little trail that we're talking about now, to even, you know, have incentive? Where's the incentive for them to even, you know, usually the ones in power are like, no, things are, let's just keep it steady and, you know, we're happy and, you know, they have their ways they could be like us, but, you know, we're happy. So let's kind of keep things, the status quo is cool. But clearly the people under them are like, no, it's not. Clearly, you know,
Yeah.
they're at each other's throats actually to their advantage, you know?
Well, I think, Dana, that something like this that you're doing, where you get together with people, your friends, or even just acquaintances, or maybe people that you disagree with, and you talk through these things. Obviously, it's not going to create an immediate paradigm shift across the nation or across the world, but I think this is the sort of thing that one person can do in their small world that might change things, because I think in the end, it's very, people have been trying to make systematic and system-wide change for hundreds of years and maybe even thousands of years. And sometimes I think it's naive. I have friends that believe very much in the idea of revolution and overturning the system. Sometimes I think the only way forward, if you want change, is just to try to create a microcosm of the kind of values that you're looking for in life. And then maybe if a lot of people did that, then it would coalesce into something bigger.
Yeah. We've talked about that quite a bit over the past, this is the 11th episode we're on now?
I'm not sure.
I actually have lost count.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, creating the microcosms, I agree. There's a sense of urgency I have, which may be felt amongst many humans at this point in this particular American society. But there's a sense of urgency, especially when you look at the echoes of history and how these cycles reoccur, these crisis points. And I think we're clearly at one right now, right smack dab in the middle of one right now. There's this urgency to like, okay, we can create these microcosms. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here, but we need, like, as again, as Eric Weinstein says, we need these break glass in case of emergency people to like take the reins of the downward spiral we're in, and like, you know, like a Mandela type person, you know, like a Lincoln type person or FDR type person to come along. Again, they weren't made that way. They weren't born that way, but they were made because at the time to do what they had to do in order to kind of sustain things. And, you know, obviously they all had their flaws, clearly, Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, but it's like that urgency is like so just screaming at my brain that sometimes I feel these communications, although important and good, are just kind of like a squirrel standing on a train track trying to stop a speeding train from hitting the corner at the bottom of the hill, you know. That's, anyway.
You know, it feels like we're trying to model a cultural shift, though, and I see it, you know, because of the work we've been doing together, just the communications we've been doing and the things that we've gotten, the tracks we've gotten onto into YouTube and whatnot, and podcasts. It's like I'm seeing it everywhere now. You know, Brittany King and you know, and Brett, and I mean all of these people. So many people are modeling this culture of talking across boundaries, and I think, you know, if we're ever going to get to a place in the macro where we can actually do this kind of macro problem solving, there has to be at least some ground in that culture of like being able to talk these things through, not polarize them, not politicize them, and, you know, and deal with the actual problems and what the solutions are. You know, you know my spiel, which is that capitalism perverts the incentives of all of it. And so, you know, until we grapple with that, we're kind of in a really tough place. There's no incentive to do this. The incentive is to make profit. And I just wanted to bring up, I was seeing this analogy in my head while you were talking, Dana, which is like it kind of you're saying there's an urgency for more macro, basically, right? Rather than
There's
just
urgency
micro.
for the macro to get its shit together.
Yeah, fucking A. And I'm thinking about like recycling, right? It's like, oh yeah, everybody should recycle. Cool, I recycle tons of shit. But what we really need to do is have less shit, especially less plastic, right? And we need to fucking figure out how to dispose of you know, of our waste in a way that's actually like you know, producing stuff that, you know, whatever byproducts that we can actually then use, which there are technologies, but again, capitalism fucks it up because there's no incentive for that. The incentive is to create stuff that then you have to create more because that creates economic growth. And so it's, you know, this is where I do see the need for systemic change. And I don't want to go. I'm not going anywhere with a pitchfork and a fucking tiki torch, trying to bust down the halls of Congress. But I do see the need for like really structural systemic change.
Well, and if it doesn't happen, there's going to be more tiki torches.
Well, that, and there's going to be millions and millions and millions of people displaced from their coastal homes and dying in disasters, and there's going to be a lot of dark shit.
On the recycling tip, I can just say I've lived here for 16 years in this building or the next building over, but like the same complex, same management. And I'm from California, okay? From 12 years old or maybe even before, we've had recycling there. So then I moved to this place in Jersey, and like I'm like, where the hell is the recycling bin? Nowhere. Finally, literally 2 months ago, maybe not even that long ago, we finally get a fucking bin for this building, which of course is like way too small to service the whole building. But it's like, that's how slow this shit is moving, man.
Yeah.
There is no incentive until the incentives are really in your face. I mean, it just overwhelming for those who have the power to change the whole system. Companies are trying to make money. Their packaging needs to look fancy, and they know that certain packaging gets people to buy their shit. The thing I love about this particular headphone company, it came in a little flimsy box, nothing, no plastic, anything, little papers. It's very expensive headphones, but they're super conscious about that stuff. And why does a little small business from Slovenia has to be the only headphone company that decides, okay, we should have really self-sustainable, everything recyclable materials. Where's the fucking incentive, man?
Well, the Slavs get it. That's cool. Sorry. Again, just from the peanut gallery. My bad.
I think Lucas should be going first in the introductions because he's Slavic.
Right? It's a minority now, according to the coalitions of color or something. This organization in Portland, there's this long list of like minorities, and Slavs are at the very bottom of like this list of minorities.
They've hierarchy.
Coalition of the Community of Color, or some organization from Portland. Yeah, it's interesting. I just found that out.
Do you know if Jews are in?
They should be. At this point, I imagine. I didn't really, didn't check, but I would, yeah.
Jews are a tricky case, right? Because it's like it's like a definitely a thing, and it's like definitely white, but not. But yes, but right, and yeah.
I can go both ways, You
got dual passport, dual citizenship.
Have you guys heard about the person? I don't know who the person is, but I guess it's a basketball player, maybe, or football player, who used the K word.
Was that the Miami Heat guy?
I think so. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting all the details of who the person was, but the level of there's an example of not necessarily cancelization, but just and his thing is ignorance. It's kind of believable in a way. I mean, you're thinking of an insult at a particular. I don't even think it was like at a particular person. It was just like while he was playing a video game on Twitch. It was like some weird situation.
I'm not offended at all. I couldn't be less offended.
Well, and that's the thing. And then people will jump on you for not being offended.
I know. But I think one of the hallmarks of a mature society is when you have people from that same society criticizing the society itself. Like I think of Nietzsche talking about how terrible the German spirit is and how much he hates it, you know. But now we think of him as some German patriot, which he's nothing of the sort.
Yeah.
And I think the more people in America that would be able to criticize American society itself, the more mature I would see America as being. And I think the same goes for any group, really. So I would be the first Jew to say that. Now they would call me a self-hating Jew, and I'll probably get into all sorts of trouble. But I think, you know, there's a great Holocaust survivor, this lady, and she would go, she just died like 2 years ago. She would go meet all of her prison guards, her Nazi prison guards, and she made friends with them, and she would go to their house and have tea with them. And she got completely shunned by the survivor community.
Wow.
She was totally canceled. They hated her. People would show up to her speeches and you'll shout at her, and just because she was trying to show, you know, take the high road, you know. So
that's similar to Daryl Davis.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah,
it's like
dude,
canceling Daryl Davis.
Yeah, because Brittany was talking about that, Brittany King, in one of her podcasts, and it's just, I mean, are they gonna cancel that dude? He's like, in my book, he's like a modern day saint, dude.
Totally.
Well, this is the guy that goes and interviews
the KKK
members.
Like befriends them. I mean,
befriends them, really. Yeah.
And he's changed people, like hundreds of different people have basically taken off their robes and, you know, had an awakening, been enlightened.
Yeah, I mean, what, you know, at the end of the day, what are the incentives, and what's the best way to get to the goal you're trying to get to? It may seem counterproductive or like weird and ridiculous, but yeah, treat the person you're talking to like they're an actual human being of some sort, like they're an imperfect human being, as is the one that you look into the mirror every day. It's just, you know, we don't have a choice of you know, of where we were born, what culture we were growing up into. We often don't have even a lot of control over what thoughts are popping in our head, or how much ability we have to identify with those thoughts or not, whether they're crazy or not, you know. So just go into every single conversation, no matter how crazy and fucked up the person may seem, with that in mind. You know, again, I've talked about, I don't really believe in, well, we've talked about this before too, Alex, about the whole free will thing. You know,
and I like what you just said about we don't even have control over the thoughts that pop into our own head. And I think that's a problem with the idea of identity, personal identity. It's this belief in a self that's totally coherent is the word that I was looking for. The belief that, you know, I am this and I am that, and I have agency over all of my actions and thoughts, and I have to have agency. I think it's a little bit outdated, you know, now that we have psychology and psychiatry and neuroscience, and we understand that the brain doesn't work that way. You know, it's not a unidirectional instrument. It's not all working together as one coherent unit. There are different forces at work. So when somebody says, I identify as this, I identify as that, I think they're forgetting what you just said, that we have much less. It's like what Freud said, the ego is not the master in his own house. So that's my take on identity.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention also, relating to what you were just talking about, treating the person like a human being. I think I learned more from the people. Of course, I learned more with the whole Facebook fiasco, if you can call it a fiasco, ordeal. There were certain people that disagreed with me vehemently, but they went out of their way and to argue with me on the terms that I was proposing. And I think certain people showed me why some of the things that I was saying didn't make sense, or why they were untenable, and what the people that just said, no, you can't say that, and I won't hear that, and how can you possibly think that, and he's the greatest and you're nothing, that didn't really help at all. So it's a good example, I think, of what you were talking about.
Yeah, man. I mean, tactics matter, like big fucking time. I'm thinking of Thomas Sowell again. Here we go. You got the, you got the restrained tactic, and then you have the unrestrained tactic. You gotta have a lot of fucking reason to unrestrain yourself, like some good evidence that your unrestrainedness is going to actually do good.
I think some of the people that were arguing with me, they might even have done it in very, in a contentious way. But the fact was that they were engaging, they were arguing with the things that I was saying. I'll give you a concrete example. Is with Wayne Shorter, I was trying to analyze his music and say that certain harmonic things didn't make sense, that didn't make sense. And I was confronted by people who said, no, let me explain to you why what you're saying is not tenable. And then, years go by and you start to realize that, well, maybe this part of my critique wasn't the greatest. Maybe, but if nobody argues with you, then
how will you go?
You can't learn anything.
Yeah. It's true.
And then if the act of arguing makes you an enemy, or then immediately lumps you into whatever the enemy camp is, right? The enemy lump. then we set up sides and get in our right and wrong paradigm versus like, let's talk about this, and even if you are coming from a like, you're wrong, but I'm going to give you the respect to actually argue these ideas, because I mean, even that, at least underneath that, like, superficial you're wrong, there's a larger space for humans to exist in, right? It's like, okay, our ideas or our actions can be criticized, can be polarized, but as human beings, we exist in a space in which we give each other the the license to exist wherever we exist in that moment, and then to engage with each other, even if it's contentious. And I think that's kind of the paradigm you're pointing at. Am I hearing that?
Yes, definitely. And I wonder what you guys think about this, though, that I noticed that particularly in the jazz world, there is maybe not so much, not in every part of the jazz world, but in certain parts, there's something about the history, about the idea of the cutting session, the idea of, oh, I'm going to show this guy how to really play, that it's not a big step from there to what you're saying where, oh, he's wrong and I'm not even going to argue with him about it. He's just wrong and I'm right, and there's no discussion.
Sure.
And I think one thing I realized was that a lot of the aesthetic arguments that I was trying to make, and the some of the thoughts about the nature of music, the nature of art, there were a lot of musicians that maybe played a kind of music that I didn't play. Like, for example, the drummer Milford Graves just died, and I was listening to some interviews of him. I realized that there were other kinds of music that I didn't necessarily listen to, but that the way people thought about music in that context was more aligned with the way that I wanted to think about music. And wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, man. Within the jazz world, I think there's so many flavors to discover. There's so many communities and perspectives of this art form to discover that It's I by way of experience, I've learned that puritanical thinking is should be abandoned. I think that happened when I heard Something Else by Ornette Coleman. When I heard that, because I'd always had this picture in my mind of what Ornette was, but then when my good friend John Spingarn played me I was probably 17 maybe, and I was fucking blown away by how much I loved it, and I was ready to not like it. You know, you there, Peter? No. Oh no worries. You know what I mean? So it's yeah. I mean, I feel you. I mean, I think there's yeah. I mean, I think there's just lots of ways to discover different viewpoints and to discover. You know, you don't like beer when you're 4, but you know, but when you're 24, you might, you know, and you might like whiskey not long after that too, which you definitely wouldn't have liked probably at 4. So anyway, I don't know if I'm even getting at what you're talking about, Alex, but
I think one thing that I learned was that there's certain musicians and certain music that I can appreciate. And for me, I think this is even more important than sometimes listening to the music for me. My appreciation for musicians became more about how they thought, either about the music that they were playing or about music in general. Or an example, you know, I don't listen to a lot of the music of Arthur Schoenberg. I don't find it pleasant to listen to. But
Arnold
sorry, Arnold
Okay.
Schoenberg. Sorry,
yeah, no worries.
Mixing up my Germans. But I admire him as a thinker and as someone that had the courage to go against the grain. And I think the same could be said about in jazz, someone like Cecil Taylor, who maybe I don't ever listen to his music, but I don't think for me it's become less important. The music is one thing, and I think that's we get different feelings when we listen to music that have to do with memories and our temperaments. I think maybe it's more separate from the idea that the musician might have than people might think. At least this is my point of view, and what's become more interesting to me about music in general is that the idea behind the music. So for that reason, I like Cecil Taylor. Why? Because I know that he's someone that likes to talk about his music, that's into literature, that's into poetry, that's into philosophy.
Yeah, man, that's really interesting. It's funny. I tend to. I'm kind of the opposite, man. I tend to just want to hear the music and not know about the person. And that's been the same. And I've only just recently started to dive into Arnold Schoenberg's like life. But man, I've been a huge fan of Arnold Schoenberg for a long time. I'm just enamored by that guy, what this guy creates. And what I like about it is that it turns off my intellectual brain and it goes straight to experience, because I have no idea what the fuck he's doing. But I still feel all these strong emotions, and that almost brings me back to the 12-year-old who just discovered Sonny Rollins. Had no idea what was going on, but I knew I fucking loved it. And then eventually, you know, I stayed with jazz and transcribe things, and you learn things from masters that are around where you are. And so the kind of what maybe a lot of jazz musicians are playing and thinking about has become slightly demystified on a just kind of overall level. So there's always this analytical brain that can go in and kind of destroy the experience. Whereas with someone like Arnold Schoenberg or Berg or even Ornette and Cecil Taylor, players that are not into the the strict framework of harmony and improvisation and jazz and style that these different idioms of jazz has, you know, I love the emotional ride that I'm taking on, and I can, well, and whether I'm feeling exactly what they were feeling at the moment they created it or not, what they're doing is creating a unique experience in me that, thank God, I don't have to analyze and think about. I could just like sit back and be a kid and like consume myself with it. Sometimes when I get into the perspective of the person, sometimes when I hear, you know, the person talking about their musics, I almost don't want to hear, because I don't want to have it. I don't want that mystification to go away. And sometimes it's because the person themselves are not the kind of person I even want to meet, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing stuff. You know, we all have different facets of ourselves, and maybe a bad interview. I've had many bad interviews. You know, maybe that's even, it shouldn't clout. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but
I think it's very interesting what you're saying about that you feel that jazz, to a certain extent, or certain kind of jazz, certain musicians, it's become demystified to you, and I feel the same way. But I'm in favor of demystification in general of the arts, and I'll tell you why. It's because I think that the artist in society in general, he can kind of fake his way into a greater position of power or reverence by virtue of the fact that he creates something that people react to emotionally, and then they idolize him. Then he becomes or she becomes untouchable. And I think this happens a lot in pop culture. It happens, you know, pretty much automatically. Less so in more art music, but I know what you're saying about there's nothing like that feeling you have when you're 12-year-old and you hear whatever music you like for the first time. It'll never be that way, and you want to hold on to that feeling, you know. And I think if you're into art and music and poetry or literature, you're always looking for this mystical feeling, this oceanic feeling that you get. But I think it's important to realize what that is exactly when you're feeling it. I think it's part of a healthy psychic life to enjoy art, to create, but to take that to the next step, where I think it happens sometimes in jazz, like with Charlie Parker as an example. He could get away with anything. He could sleep with his friends' wives, you know, he could never show up to the gig. He could do this or that. It didn't matter, because people thought he was so great, that he played so great. He was such a genius that anything that he did in life was excusable. And I think that's a danger of the artist in society, or one of the dangers.
Yeah. I don't think I have a danger of that personally, because I'm pretty hard on myself. I almost don't believe sometimes, or anyway. I believe that the compliments are sincere, but I have a hard time agreeing with them, is maybe what I'm trying to say. It's hard to see myself outside of myself, you know what I mean? Outside of my own thoughts of myself. So, but yeah, man, there is that deification of certain that is dangerous, and I see it with a lot of the greats. I mean, I think I love the beauty of hearing about these, maybe not not the shiniest parts of of a jazz musician's or iconic person's life, whoever they are. Honestly, I mean, even the greatest geniuses of any field, really. I love hearing the human. You know, we're all human at the end of the day. Yeah, so and maybe my upbringing has just planted me into not really trying to deify or seeing the value in deifying someone, but it is. But I don't know. There's. I mean, the time it's going to take me right now to demystify Schoenberg, it's. I'm going to have to set aside a couple of years of my life to do it. You know what I mean? So I'm cool. Just like, I mean, and I will probably at some point, because I know he wrote a harmony book, and I'm afraid to look at it because I know it's gonna be a different experience with his music afterwards.
Blow your mind.
What do you say?
It's going to blow your mind.
It's gonna blow my mind, and in simplicity, actually, I know that it's very digestible. Schoenberg's book on harmony, and anyway, I just love. I love being a kid. I mean, it's the thing that got me into the music. It's the thing. It's the thing that made me dedicate so much a part of my life to it. So I need that. I feel. At least I feel now that I need that mystification inspiration to keep me fresh and keep me kid-like in it. And those weird harmonies that Wing comes up with are just fucking heaven, man. Anna Maria, oh my lord, or Nefertiti, or shit, man. Schizophrenia. Oh, the one that kills me is Sanctuary. I don't know if you guys have heard that tune, but that just puts me into a space that I could never create for myself. And I don't know the song, thankfully. I don't know it like intimately.
No, and it's funny you mentioned the harmony and connection with Schoenberg, because I think maybe reading some of Schoenberg's things made me start to think about, and also arguing with people about Wayne Shorter, start to think about how kind of arbitrary some of what I think of as the rules of harmony are. Mm-hmm. And actually studying classical music and taking classical composition lessons, I learned that too, that it's more convention than anything else. And, that trying to talk about it as if it's right and wrong is very misguided. So that part of my critique, I've pretty much thrown all out the window. Any kind of technical critique. Anytime I criticize a musician or critique a musician, I should say, or I'm much more open-minded about that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where are you at, Peter? Where are you at, Peter?
Hey, sorry. Thanks for your patience. No. I got my second jab yesterday, and so just a little aside, and I'm really feeling it right now, feeling woozy. So, and my wife, it was perfect timing because I was like, I think I'm gonna have to take a break and get some water and like eat some Advil, and then my wife needed the printer, which is over here. So anyway, good timing. Anyway, I'm struck by the kind of the relationship between the subjective and the objective, and the well, like, Alex, you're talking about like my critique, right? And the kind of how some of that has evolved out of a right and wrong paradigm, which is very much like and your turn to take a break, Dana. So I think of the right and wrong as an objective perspective, right? You can objectify it, you can measure it, and then you can say what, if that's right or wrong. And we all know, I think, especially as we mature as musicians, we realize like, oh, there's a huge subjective element to music also. And there's a mix between those two that's ineffable, in the sense it's very hard to say where, like, in fact, the mix between subjective and objective is subjective. It depends on the person, right, who is either critiquing, listening, trying to understand, so there's more subjective than objective, right? Because even the mix between what's subjective and objective is subjective. So anyway, there's that. And then the other thought that I had, which I don't know, what, I don't have like a sentence that's really clear, but is the role of humility in all of this kind of contention right? And engagement that is not homogeneous, you know. There's a really important role for humility, and I think like a lot of the time as human beings that is not our default, and that has to be acknowledged and anticipated, right? We can't write people off because they're not humble in the moment about whatever it is they're saying or doing, but at the same time I think we can't just if we want to make progress and we want to be in this paradigm where we're actually having productive contention, somebody has to start somewhere with some level of humility. And I don't know if that, you know, I don't, Alex, you were talking about your uh, productive arguments that happened in the Fuck Wayne Shorter threads. Um, and I'm curious if you feel like, you know, there was kind of an experience of that, of the humility on both ends in the productive arguments of just like, well, we're humble enough to at least, you know, engage with each other, engage ideas as ideas. And I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure I really was. I'm not a good example of humility during that period. So,
Fair enough.
and I wouldn't claim to be. I think that would be foolish. But I do think what you said about subjective and objective in music, I think it's something that I've come to understand or to agree with, and to the only thing you can talk about in art is why you like something, what are the parameters that for you are desirable, what is the feeling, the emotion that you're looking for, you know. And I think a lot of people said, I would say things about like there's too much emotion, but I think the thing that I really wanted to say was it's not the emotion that I'm looking for in Wayne Shorter's music. There's another kind of emotion that I want. But again, I do think that there's something about jazz, like this whole idea that people say he can play or he can't play. I think there's something about the language of jazz that can make you think that it's more objective than it really is, when instead you could say, he knows how to play the music that I like, and I like it for this and this and that reason, instead of, no, he just can't play, you know. And I started to realize, like, I've been saying so and such saxophone player couldn't play for a long time, and then I thought about it. I said, what am I saying? How could I say that this person cannot play? He's put hours and hours and hours and hours into the instrument. It's that he doesn't play and he hasn't learned the things that I want to hear. And then I started to say, well, why are these things that I want to hear important? What do they mean? Do they mean anything aesthetically? Do they represent anything to me? Some of them did. I think one example that I was talking about yesterday with a friend is Lester Young versus Coleman Hawkins. I prefer Lester Young. I prefer Lester Young for aesthetic reasons, because of his reserve, because of his, maybe some people wouldn't like me to use this word, because of his femininity, as opposed to maybe Coleman Hawkins' masculinity. Now, all I can say is I prefer that, and that's the emotion that I like. I can't say now Coleman Hawkins can't play, which I never thought that ever in my life, but that's one example. When it comes to the humility, I think I was very, like I said, I couldn't pretend for a second that I showed any humility during that whole thing. But the thing that made me so angry, I think, and that prevented me from being humble was the running immediately into a brick wall with people saying, you can't say that. How could you possibly think that? How could you possibly say that? You're not allowed to say that. It made me want to push back even harder. I think I have a very contrarian personality also. Yeah, maybe that's why we can talk. Dana?
Yeah, how easy is it to be humble and defensive at the same time?
It's difficult, I think. And I think there's also, there's a danger of false humility sometimes that I think is counterproductive to any kind of real discussion. You don't, and I think I can be like that sometimes too. And I think it's has something to do with our society and the way we're brought up. It's like you want everything to be cool with everybody. You want to be friends with everybody. You want things to. I think I have friends from the West Coast that tell me it's much more pronounced on the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. In New York, you have a lot of people bumping into each other and saying like, "Get out of the way" and "fuck you." In California, I've heard it's more like, "Oh, cool, chill out, man. It's all good," you know. But sometimes when it's like that, then you don't really get to the heart of anything. You don't really end up talking about anything.
Yeah, this authenticity, right? You lose it, and if you sacrifice authenticity in the name of humility, it's not really a productive humility, right? I've certainly grappled with that in my life in many ways. And it's, I don't even know that it's, the masquerade is really humility most of the time. It's more just like pacification or whatever. But hey man, I don't, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt all the time, or not, I'd rather not speak what's true for me right now because I don't want to get into a conflict. And I mean, look, there's value in that for me, in not always saying what comes to my mind, because sometimes what's coming into my mind needs to be reflected upon, and isn't really authentic. It's just a reaction. I think there's a difference between authentic and reactionary. Not that your reaction isn't authentic to who you are in that moment, right? But it's nuanced, right? And depending on what we really want our kind of energy and effect to be in the world around us, we need to develop filters that that are like nuanced also, in terms of how we want to affect others, and how we want to engage with whatever it is we're engaging with. I mean, there are people in my life who I vent with about musical situations, for instance, right? And like that's shit that's venting. It's not, there's like lots of other perspectives, and there's it's like we'll vent sometimes in relatively harsh ways, and then be like, okay, all right, we're just getting this out, just going dark to vent, but really we're also very grateful, and there's a lot of good stuff happening, and so I think like there's nuance in context too, and authenticity, though, those things all play together. And sometimes it's cool for shit to just come out, and then you get into the real shit real fast, right? And like those reactionary cycles then actually get us into places that we wouldn't get otherwise. So I kind of think there's a place for shit starting, and sometimes that place is like undiagnosable and unpredictable. It's just when somebody has the shit to start and they start it, it's like, okay, cool, this shit's hitting the fan, we're gonna fucking get into it. Even then, I think we need to whatever the fuck that means, but ideally, as humans, we can have that paradigm that has a container wide enough for that, for shit hitting fans, and for like, oh fuck, this shit's hitting my fan, and I'm like going into lizard brain, and then like, and then we're gonna fucking stay in, we're gonna stay in a process together until we get to a point where we can see each other, and
Couple
be like,
things.
cool. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Couple things I get from you. First of all, I learned something, a distinction there that I really haven't spent much time thinking about: reactionary versus what did you say, Peter?
Authenticity.
Reactionary versus authenticity. Well, that's, first of all, I've got to really marinate with that one for a minute personally, because I think oftentimes I'm very reactive and with stuff that I haven't worked out, but it's something that I feel may spawn a productive conversation in terms of clarifying what may be jumbling up in my brain. So I always feel I gotta, dude. Well, now when we talk about authenticity, you know what I'm thinking about. I immediately go to Gabor Mate. It's like authenticity versus safety. When I'm choosing safety, and that may be just safety and not wanting in a conflict, or want safety because I want to still be a part of the community, whatever it is. At this point in my life, after what I've been through, you can fuck that shit. I'm sorry. It's about authenticity all 100% for me. And if that offends, I'm graciously sorry. But I think we move forward quicker and more directly if we just put it out there. I mean, I'm telling you and everyone that I know who is a human being and can comprehend what I'm saying, that please put a baseball bat to anything that's flying out of my mouth. I actually want that. I'd rather be wrong. As Matt Dillahunty says, I would rather know as many true things and as few false things as possible. Or I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. That's really my ultimate goal. So, but I guess do you have to state that every time you talk to someone that may be offended? By the way, I've had this thing up for a second. I had this post. I don't know if any of you guys saw it a couple days ago. Jesus Christ! Of course, it went away. It was a Thomas Paine quote: "He who dares not to offend cannot be honest." That's the quote. And then I'll be quite a few comments here. But what how does that sit with you? Anyone?
I think that I like what you're saying. I like how you're thinking, but I think the way that you talk and the way that you interact with people, it's obvious that you don't have an inflated ego. You don't have this mega maniacal opinion of yourself. Is that the right word?
I'll take that.
And
monomaniacal.
Monomaniacal.
I think, and Peter, I think that's what you mean when you say humility, is that in the end that it seems to me like you're interested in Buddhism and Eastern religion philosophy. So yeah, the little I've read of Buddhist texts, it's a lot of it is the idea that the self is an illusion. You're not what feels like your coherent identity. Like, this is related to what I was saying before, is not that. And yes, I think that should be the starting point for every conversation. That I know that I'm nobody, I'm nothing, a speck of dust, but I should still be able to say my honest opinion. Yeah, that's my take on it. And the other thing that I was thinking was that what passes for humility today is more, I think, it's a corporate capitalist strategy for keeping in line, never saying anything kind of out of pocket, because you don't want to offend anyone. And that's not the kind of humility I think you were talking about at all.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's a fine line though, right? In the name, you get habituated to like a lack of conflict. And I mean, certainly like we could go and, my upbringing and whatnot is, all about like trying to avoid conflict and blah, blah, blah. So that, that's a deep thread for me. Um, and, but it's important for me to do that level of self-reflection too. And I think like the more I've done that for myself, the more I can see that for others, whether it's clear that they've done that reflection or not. But when I see somebody in, say, a reactive space, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's authentic to where you're at, but also like there's deep threads there for you, like there are for everybody, right? And I'm gonna try my very best in any moment like that to see that person as a full human being, as a layered human being with like, yeah, what they're saying or doing in this moment, may present whatever way it's presenting, and that's a reaction to these circumstances. It's also based on a whole bunch of other things that's happened in their life, and I'm going to treat them as a full human being. That's something that's taken me a long time to grow into.
Yeah, man, we have these reactions that are kind of innate. That yeah.
Hey,
what were you gonna say? Yeah.
I got to wrap up in about 5 minutes. So I'm wondering what would be a cool way to wrap this up. And Alex, we could just give you the floor for an idea or a wrap up. Also, Lucas, I haven't really heard from you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. There was one thing that you brought up, Alex, earlier about, and it got passed around a little bit, about microcosms and like creating microcosms. And I'm very much part of what these discussions have done for me is like kind of hone in on a micro philosophy. It's a micro that's connected to macro intentions and paradigms that I'd like to see, but understanding that I really need to be working in the micro. And so what you said then really resonated with me, and that was something I thought like maybe we could just pass around and everybody kind of give their own take on like what would be your micro, if you're, and that could be something that's really real for you right now, or it could just be something that's a vision or a desire. Anyway, that was a thought.
What do you mean exactly? What do you mean exactly? You mean a micro solution that could be that you would like to be scaled up, or
yeah, like it could be really concrete or maybe a little more abstract, but I'm thinking of really concrete things in the micro.
Well, something immediately comes to mind for me is that in other countries, I think there's a lot more of a tradition of literary cafe or the philosophical society, people that get together all the time. And I'm not the biggest fan of very formal societies and associations, but I think the culture of getting together on a regular basis with people and talking about anything really is something that is missing from the history of this country and this country now. And I think obviously you could tell I'm going to sound Eurocentric because I am, but in Paris and in Rome, there's the square, not much more in Rome, but also in Germany, there's always been the town square. especially ever since Roman times, ever since ancient Greek times. And it was just the place where people get together every day and they talk about whatever. And it makes people used to encountering different ideas. It makes people learn how to interact with other people, learn how to live in a civil way with people. And there's a very interesting video of Kobe Bryant talking in Italian about growing up in Reggio Emilia in Bologna, where his father was playing basketball. And he talks about that his children can't understand what it was like to grow up in a place where he went to the piazza, the town square, every day with his friends. So that's my 2 cents.
We might need to start creating that virtually because we're so far down into history at this point. This is kind of a little bit of that. Has been for me, for sure. But on a grander level, what are your thoughts of Clubhouse? Sort of wanting, the way I've described it to my friend yesterday, we started off with Friendster, right? Then we had MySpace, then we had Facebook, then we had Twitter, then we had freaking Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and it's been this definite motion this way towards hell, perhaps. Whatever direction you want to look at, right? But I feel like Clubhouse is still in that way down position, but just going a tick towards the other direction in a sense. There's some definite bad parts of annoying aspects of Clubhouse, but also I've had some amazing conversations on Clubhouse that I would have not had anywhere else. Actually, I'm meeting with a guy in 5 minutes here, Manuel. Maybe you were in that talk, I think, Lucas.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I'll meet with
Great.
him in 5-10 minutes here, and so anyway, what not to piggyback on your initial question, Peter, but perhaps that's the current answer to that, Alex.
Power of conversation. And I want to just say about Clubhouse, the fact that people are being can start a room and talk about anything and invite people up to the stage to talk with them is really, really good. As long to also go back to Gabor Mate, just being authentic is really important, to have authentic conversations with one another, and in doing so create clarity within the culture, trying to figure out, letting your guards down, putting down your guns, and just having authentic conversations, being authentic to each other, to yourself, most importantly, so you can radiate that outward. That's what I'd like to add.
Could the soundbite be try to always be authentic and allow others to be authentic as well when conversing? I don't know.
That sounds great.
If you're trying, are you being authentic?
And not just
There's a Zen cone for you.
Right,
okay,
right,
the
right.
words.
Okay, yeah.
Not
Language, back to the word, power of the word. Yeah.
I'm just fucking with the idea, but it struck me, that maybe on some level we're all just trying to be authentic, and we're both being authentic and we're just trying.
Some seem to just always be there. New Yorkers used to be before the Californication of New York. But yeah, I don't know, the try, that's thank you, Peter.
It's an interesting idea, right? I mean, I think it's a little bit of a wrench in the gears of the idea of even just the concept of some idealized authenticity that we could potentially get to. Like, can we really? What about the person who's like says whatever the fuck they think all the time, but they're constantly having to apologize and they don't, and they're like, dude, I can't get out of my own way, and it's not because they're being authentic. It's because they're just not being reflective, and then upon reflection they're like, damn, I shouldn't have said that. I wish I hadn't said that. I didn't mean it.
I think we all have different abilities to be able to reflect in the moment I think our ability to reflect in the moment varies from person to person and situation and topic and whatever, depending on what you ate that day, how much coffee you drank. But how does authenticity look if you pair it with the reality that there's no such thing as time?
Whoa, that's heavy. I was thinking about what Alex was talking about, of like the subject of self, and
Is there a self?
it's similar, right? Is like, okay, so is this authenticity actually like an ideal, like a set me, right, being authentic, or is it just me being authentic in this moment, and then in the next moment my authenticity might refute what I just did, or might adapt or alter in some fundamental way what I just did or said.
I like that version.
I like it too, and I think we all need to fucking give each other the space to do that, you know?
And I think this is the thing about cancel culture too. Everyone is expected to be completely coherent, as if every single thing that they've ever said has to fit into some, we keep saying paradigm, so I'm looking for another word.
That's all right.
Paradigm.
By all means.
Right, like a coherent, internally coherent, externally coherent paradigm. And
As if
like
anyone has ever
framework.
been coherent, as if any human being has ever been completely coherent, as if any human psychology could ever be coherent. I like to think of the idea that we don't have a self. We're millions of selves if we have a self at all. We're different.
Most of ourselves is not even us.
Yeah.
Microbiome is really just a bunch of
Yes.
millions of other cells.
I agree. And so I think when you mention time, I think it's this, you could say the same thing, that really the self doesn't exist, but keeping that in mind, I think it allows us to, you become humble in a certain way just by thinking that way. You become less dogmatic, you become less attached to your own ideas, and more open to confrontation with other ideas.
Beautiful, man. That was a beautiful cherry on top of this beautiful cake we just made. Cats.
Yeah.
We have to have you on again if you don't mind, because I think there's so many threads again that we could pull on from this conversation. We haven't even touched nihilism, but
Oh yeah, damn. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry, I gotta go teach, but
I've got a
otherwise we would
meeting.
hang, and you got.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was really
man.
pleasure. You guys made me feel really welcome, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you.
Man, thank you for joining us, man. And you're always welcome.
Thanks. I'd love to be back.
Yeah. Awesome,
All right,
Cats.
cats.
Well, till next time.
All right.
Peace.
See you guys.
Much love.